Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Boruto 2 Blue Vortex video. This one is going to be speculation ahead of chapter 26, which is coming out next week. We'll talk about chapter 25, some of the key things that happen, and attempt to speculate about what might happen in this next chapter. Interestingly, of course, chapter 25 was the start of a new volume, so we expect basically this volume, so 25, 26, 27, and 28, probably to be this kind of transition arc as we go from the kind of first phase of the fight against the Divine Tree characters into the second phase of it, kind of after we get through these next couple of chapters. So 26 probably should play out somewhat similarly to 25 in terms of there being a lot of character focused scenes, highlighting relationship stuff, highlighting probably characters that will be in play when we go into the more action stuff in a few chapters time. So that's kind of what they're doing here. These chapters are often maybe some of the best in my opinion, because it just allows kind of the full scope of the series to kind of come out, because we don't have to focus on action for a little bit, so we can just have a lot of character focused scenes. So here are the key points from 25. So Moegi and Shinki have been freed from the trees. This confirms the full defeat of Matsuri and Ryu. So, of course, the idea is we get the return of these two characters. Admittedly, we're not focusing too much on the sand stuff. We'll get into that a little bit later on. But we did see Moegi kind of make her return. And also, you know, two of the 5 Divine Tree characters being fully defeated is notable progress. Kind of highlighting that the first stage of the arc did have kind of meaning to it. We actually accomplished something. Gaara is also expected to wake up soon and recover. We'll see if he comes into play in any sort of significance. But hey, he's a noted character. He was in trouble at the start of the last arc. We had to address this. There is, of course, some romantic teasing for Konohamaru and Moegi, which only made sense given what the Matsuri dynamic with Konohamaru was. We'll see if they do anything with this. We'll discuss that in this video. We had Sarada, of course, confirm that she likes Boruto to Sumire. The two of these girls finally have their big kind of talk with each other where they finally are open. They're not going to hold back anymore, I suppose, with their feelings. And Ada wants to talk to the two of them. That's a pretty direct, it feels like, setup for a scene that probably is about to happen. So we'll see that as well. Himawari, we see, is sort of struggling with her new powers. You know, she has to think of herself as living chakra, basically. But we also continue to kind of tease the idea of just how unique is this situation. She's like Jinchuriki-esque, but like not quite a Jinchuriki, but like, it's different, and we're just dealing with that, which is interesting. So she's coming back into play, which is cool. And then the big one here. Boruto communicates with Momoshiki, offering a deal, his body for Momo's help defeating Jura. So really kind of surprise, kind of in a way cliffhanger ending to the previous chapter of just Boruto just blatantly coming out and saying like everything basically. No building up to it, just hey, here's the deal. So we'll talk about that. The preview page for this chapter over on the official Naruto website is this. So we see that Inojin is going to come visit Himawari and give her a jar of honey, seemingly setting up what they kind of had done previously in their chapters together, that these two are developing a kind of stronger connection than we thought. Probably early teasing of shipping kind of romance stuff, theoretically. I think this is interesting because, one, it helps Inojin stand out as a character compared to like so many of the other characters like that aren't just our main characters, and it also gives Himawari like a connection to a character like outside of her character, kind of on an individual level. So I actually appreciate what they're doing with this. We'll see how far they kind of go with it, but you know, if Himawari is going to be a significant part of the story, it makes sense that she has her own stuff going on, like this potentially blossoming relationship with Inojin, which is interesting by itself. So, as I said at the start, we're in this kind of in-between arc dynamic, which oftentimes in manga are some of the best, because you can just touch on anything that you really need to, because there's no need to do the fight immediately. So yeah, plot, character stuff is going to come into play here. And yeah, I do suspect the whole volume is going to be sort of like this, as we build to the final fights with Jura and Ko. So, obviously there's going to be speculation about, okay, how heavily involved are Jura and the villains going to be as we build to this? Will this be more of a cliffhanger for, say, chapter 28, which will be like the end of this volume leading into the next one? Or are we going to get gradual teases across this? I'm not really sure. So let's get into the really obvious thing. So the speculation that probably everyone's going to have is, okay, Momoshiki finally is in the story after us waiting the whole series to get to this point. What are they going to do with this? I do think it's a very weird one. Because of how blunt to the point Boruto was, in that, like, it's just, hey, I will give you everything you've always wanted from me, my body. I just want your help defeating the villain. And so it's this weird one where it's like, the speculation surely is just that Momo says yes, and we have this agreement and we have this setup into the future of, well, we know Boruto doesn't just die. We pretty much seem to know that Momoshiki's not the one in charge of Boruto theoretically into the future, so what happens to stop this from happening? So it kind of feels like has to be more to this in terms of Momo's reaction to this, the fact that there's no negotiation to build to this, Boruto just comes out with it. That makes me feel like, hey, does Momo doubt Boruto's intentions? Like, because Momo has to put trust in Boruto, that if they make this deal, he helps him take out Jura, that Boruto is just going to basically put his defenses down and let Momoshiki take over him. What's the deal with that? You know, that's the whole situation there. But there's also questions like, you know, why has Momoshiki been so quiet? Not really continuously, it feels like, putting the pressure on Boruto, kind of just letting him do his thing for this last while. Has Momoshiki changed since the last time he's been properly part of the story? And then I think most notably to a certain degree is, how does he feel about the villains Boruto kind of wants his help to face? These are intelligent Ten-Tail / Divine Tree beings. And we know that for the most part the Divine Trees are like tools effectively that the Otsutsuki use. So the idea that they're suddenly becoming individual and intelligent, he must not like that. But so what's the situation going on here? Obviously Momo's goal, as far as we're aware, as an Otsutsuki, would be to take over Boruto's body, sacrifice Kawaki to the Divine Tree, to the Ten-Tails, to create the Divine Tree, get the Chakra Fruit, and go about his Otsutsuki business like he wanted to in the first place. But again, it has a certain amount of time has passed. Momoshiki's been in a very unique situation for all this time. What's going on here? And that's the point, is just that it feels odd if we maybe just go around to this thing and Momoshiki just gets a grin on his face and is like, yes, that's exactly what I want. We'll see how the deal progresses. And I think that's the thing. We don't really, I suppose, know this current iteration of Momo just yet. So we're going to have to wait and see what exactly happens here. With Boruto in the context of this dynamic, the big thing here is the idea that this has been him in Two Blue Vortex, very willing to sacrifice himself, accept all of the kind of tragic situations that he's involved in, and just, he will make the sacrifice play. And he's willing to do that once again. And he clearly needs to have conversations with the people who care for him to make him, I suppose, want to live for the future and not just sacrifice himself to protect everyone else. And I'm very interested to see how they go about doing that, because clearly he's going to make this secret deal, I guess, with Momo, unless Momo kind of goes against the deal immediately. That would be a switch up, and, you know, it would change things a little bit. But if the deal is on the table, it's basically going to happen. Yeah, it creates a weird situation with the people who care for Boruto, where that would be a crazy thing for them to find out, that he's willing to die to get the victory, basically. And it speaks to, I suppose, the kind of heroic character that he's become, but leaning too hard into self-sacrifice, ultimately. And he kind of, this is where, like, he needs the people around him to kind of, like, step up so that he doesn't have to take this all on himself. But because, as we saw, the power-up for Kawaki isn't enough to just defeat Jura, Something else has to be the factor that changes the course of the fight with Jura. And the idea right now is that Boruto feels Momoshiki is going to be the turning factor, but what if it's like Himawari, who gains full control of her powers? That might be the setup for what they're kind of potentially going to do. So that's very, very interesting. The other point about this is that Boruto making this deal has to be aware that the deal is fundamentally trading one mega threat for another. It's exchanging effectively the death of Jura for the kind of birth of Boruto Momoshiki, which is almost just as bad. We don't really know the scale of that, but it's, you know, an equivalent threat to a certain degree. Now, I'm guessing the idea is that Boruto expects Kawaki. He knows Kawaki wants to go after him, and he'll do that regardless of if Boruto is or isn't in control of his own body. So, I guess the trust is all in Kawaki. Like, we take down Jura, I give my body over to Momo, and then you take me out. And that should solve the problem. But is Kawaki strong enough to take out Momoshiki Boruto after potentially a big fight against Jura? There's a lot of kind of moving parts when we get down to that. And again, there is an assumption that the deal with Momo goes ahead as simply as we maybe expect it to. Because again, he's given him the deal that it seems like Momo would obviously want. But there's going to be more, I think, to what actually goes on here. So we'll see what happens. But it's important that Momoshiki is back in play. I think we need an Otsutsuki character because he's the one who has a bit maybe more perspective in terms of what the Divine Tree characters are. And again, his perception on what the villains are might be an interesting one if we ever delve into that to any sort of degree. Romance. I know some people are not going to be super happy about sort of the prevalence of romance kind of within the story, but I don't mind it. I appreciate that they're actually doing stuff. I don't think it's taken over the story so much that it's a problem, but they're clearly doing stuff with this on multiple factors. Konohamaru Moegi clearly has come into play a little bit here. Sarada Boruto, Sumire Boruto are of course like that's like the main dynamic among the characters. But again, it's kind of one-sided for now. We know what the two of these feelings are, but we don't really know how Boruto feels. And literally the last page of the last chapter addresses the idea that they feel Boruto's kind of oblivious to this. From our perception on Boruto, it's probably more the idea that he's got a lot of other things on his mind rather than focusing on the romance. But like I mentioned earlier on, there is that contrast of they're now going to be going all out theoretically with telling Boruto maybe how they feel, whereas he is preparing to sacrifice himself to win the fight that's coming up. And those are two interesting things in terms of how they kind of mesh together. And if they get their chance to talk to Boruto before any big things actually happen, that will be important. There's also, of course, as from the preview page, of course, the seeming setup for Himawari Inojin, but also a little bit from the previous arc as well, with regards to Himawari got her kind of big moment with Kurama, kind of in response in a way to Inojin's injury and so on. So that seems to be maybe a little bit of a setup there. And obviously Ada's arc relates to romance as well, where she, of course, is being kind of connected with these two to a certain degree. But again, she has her own romance thing in terms of, like, she wants a relationship with Kawaki in the future. And only Otsutsukis are kind of available to her because they're the only people her powers don't really work on. Except it also didn't work on these two, which is kind of interesting. At least one of the powers, you know, that whole idea. But yeah. The big question I have is, are we actually doing romance stuff now kind of regularly within the series? Or are we just kind of doing kind of classic Naruto, like every so often we'll come back to the fact that romance is kind of a part of the series? I'm interested to see what they do with that. With the Sarada Sumire situation, the idea is like, wait, what are we doing here? They're not going to full-on fight for each other because they seem on really good terms, given that they've now had this conversation. I guess their plan is just that they're each going to be quite open with Boruto, and I guess they'll just accept whoever Boruto, quote-unquote, chooses, is maybe the idea. But it's unclear. the part of the problem that we have here is that Sarada is like one of the main characters effectively within the series. Sumire isn't quite there like at all, and it feels like what's her role within the story outside of this romance plot. And so it kind of feels like we need to do something a bit more significant with Sumire, given that, again, a lot of the context we have on Sumire does come from the anime, not the manga. So there is that to kind of keep in mind as well. And then, yeah, what is this dynamic, given that Boruto plans to kind of sacrifice himself? All three kind of need to be open with each other, but from kind of different perspectives to a certain degree. Konohamaru Moegi, I kind of feel like the approach they should take here is probably just to have these two get together. I think with a lot of the younger or teen romances with the main cast, they're obviously going to leave it until the very end of the series to, I think, properly commit to doing anything truly with the relationships. But given that Konohamaru and Moegi are now kind of the kind of adult characters within the series in Boruto, I do feel, given the setup that you've done now, you can just have these two start a relationship. And I think that would actually create a very interesting dynamic for the two of them. Just to kind of highlight doing something like a little bit different. That like it feels like to a certain degree, the reason you did the whole Konohamaru Matsuri thing was to set the stage for he can't even bring himself to fake this Matsuri relationship because theoretically he has feelings for Moegi, and now they could actually do something with that. I hope they just kind of go for it and don't just keep the romance kind of teases going and there's nothing else. With Inojin and Himawari, like I said at the start, I think it's a nice thing to do to give, you know, Himawari a key connection outside of her family. It elevates Inojin as a character, just because I don't think he's ever been the most interesting characters in any like the anime arcs that we've had or any involvement in the manga up until the recent idea of him stepping up to try and like defend Himawari and the tease of this kind of like early stage romance that they're kind of theoretically doing, where if they do this, I suppose, in the right way, if Himawari is properly being kind of positioned as like she's properly joining the main cast, especially if she gains any control or strength with her kind of Kurama powers, she can properly join the main cast, and that would then give Inojin the kind of an arc to grow stronger to be in the same kind of category as Himawari, so that he can theoretically protect her. And then they already seem to be maybe setting the stage for that she maybe grows in her power by wanting to protect Inojin, which could be interesting. But, you know, I don't think it's from a direct romance perspective. This is, I think, just early stages of teasing. I don't think they're maybe going to commit to anything here until, like I said, maybe towards the end of the series. But it's nice little setup stuff to be doing right now. As for the powers, like I just said there, what is going to be the big breakthrough? Where the problem she seems to be facing is that she's struggling with the idea of being asked to kind of view herself not as like a physical entity, but like as a manifestation of chakra. And once she does, she'll be able to kind of be the Jinchuriki plus to a certain degree that she is. That she has this deeper connection with Kurama than any Jinchuriki has ever had. That's what she needs to get. But what will put herself in that mindset? Is it kind of like before when she actually used the power kind of to protect Inojin? Maybe. Anything else? I'm not really sure right now. In terms of the villains, I do want to see if any of the surviving characters have any reaction whatsoever to the loss of Matsuri and Ryu. Now, previously they didn't seem to particularly care, as in like they'd grab the Soul Thorn bulb if it was right there, but clearly they didn't go out of their way to do anything fancy to get them back. They basically, for the most part, let them, like, they lost the fight, they're not strong enough, that sort of idea. But given that there has been a bit of a focus with most of the other characters about kind of trying to understand why humans act the way they do, kind of irrationally, out of love, it would be interesting to see if there is this kind of like they don't understand why they miss having these two around or something like that. there could be an interesting thing, depending on how far we're really trying to go with the idea of this kind of, you know, 10 tails beast gaining this kind of level of kind of emotional intelligence that it's never had before. Obviously, with the ones that aren't Jura, it's kind of directed on the basis of who the character in the tree is, but Jura himself is a bit of an enigma still to a certain degree, but going through kind of some similar things, which is interesting. Otherwise, of course, we have to set up the fights that are going to happen going forward. Our 3 characters left are Hidari, Mamushi, and Jura. Hidari's target, of course, is Sarada, and they're going for, I suppose, the idea of exploring, I suppose, the kind of familial connection. Now, we didn't really address that too much in the previous kind of encounter with Hidari, but the idea is that we probably should see that going forward. Now, Sarada, of course, now with the Mangekyo and her special power that she has with that, should be able to have a decent fight against Hidari, but it probably will be Sarada paired up with a couple of other characters. We need to see just how involved this all gets. The setup feels like it's maybe like Sarada and Sumire. Like Sumire, I feel like does need to maybe get involved in the fights if she has a chance to actually stand alongside Sarada in the story. She has to be involved in the fights and not just the other stuff. Just to get across kind of who she is, what her skill set is, because again, we haven't really seen her in that sense anytime soon. Otherwise, like, you know, are we going to get Sakura involved in this? I'm not really sure how many other characters will get involved in this fight. Because with, like, them just taking, say, like, Matsuri out of the picture, it means, like, okay, well, Inoshika Cho don't really have their own fight, so are they just going to be backing up Himawari wherever she gets involved? That's interesting. The Momoshiki one is the most, like, interesting one because his target is Ada, but also the character he's based on is Bug, who is not really the character we care about massively. So, it's kind of the one that maybe involves the least amount of, like, the kind of high profile characters. But so, like, okay, Mamushi, Bug, Ada, Demon, Delta maybe involved over here. Who else? You know, they might be setting up the idea of, like, before maybe we fight Jura, maybe Kawaki and Boruto can get involved in these fights. Like, Boruto could help out here. It'd be very interesting if Kawaki actually stepped in to help Ada out and kind of reignite that kind of romantic kind of spark thing that was maybe going on there. We have to wait and see. But a lot of work maybe needs to be done to kind of get to this. We started the setup of, like, she knows she's being kind of watched. And again, we are, I think, using, whereas this is using clearly the idea of family connection, because it's Sasuke Sarada. This is using, I guess, obsessive love, potentially, because Bug seemed kind of obsessed with Ada, beyond maybe just her powers. So that might be what they're going for here, because she seems very weirded out by Mamushi. She doesn't like the intrusions, the fact that he can kind of see into her own powers. And they're going for that sort of a feeling. And so, yeah, Demon might be able to step up in a big fight here, which is interesting. We need him, because apparently, again, he's effectively the most powerful character of the series as far as we're aware, give or take. So we have to address what's going on with him. So there's that. Do we have time to cover what's going on with the Sand characters? I don't know. I think it was a little bit of a surprise to see how just really quickly they wrapped up, like, yep, Shinki's gonna be okay, Gaara's gonna be okay, Yodo, yeah, I guess she's dead. I'm not sure if we're ever going to go back and address that. Like, that Araya, I guess, accomplished his mission, but now he has lost one of his teammates and also the person he was in love with, basically. Where does that leave the Shinki Araya team now that they've lost their teammate? If indeed that is the direction that they're going with, because I still maintain Yodo's death was a really weirdly communicated thing within the series. But, you know, that it is what it is. Otherwise, like, I'm just excited to see where they go, because, like, obviously they could decide to bring Amado back into the story, maybe because it doesn't really maybe leave a lot for Kawaki to do until we get back around to the fights happening. So maybe we get another Amado Kawaki scene, because again, we are setting up the idea where they kind of came up with the deal where, okay, I'll help you out with your daughter Akebi after we deal with the Otsutsukis. But from Amado's perspective, he's worried Kawaki won't survive all of this, and he needs Kawaki's powers to actually make this happen. So what's Amado going to do? Because Amado still remains this very mysterious, enigmatic character, where just the concept of, like, the reason certain, like, god-level jutsu are within certain characters in the series is effectively because of him, is this crazy point that feels like we need to come back around to eventually. Not to mention the ongoing plot threads of, like, yeah, you know, Ada, Sumire Sarda, and the Omnipotence. Are we going to come back around to that? Are we going to resolve the whole Omnipotence to switcheroo now, or after this arc? What's the situation there? There's a lot of things that they could do. I'm not sure if I'm expecting anything like absolutely huge to happen here. I think the big one is definitely on just like how they go about doing Momoshiki. And this is assuming they actually follow up in this chapter on this, because they definitely could take the approach where, just because they kind of left off a few plot threads with the idea of, like, there should be a follow-up scene, that they'll do it immediately. We've definitely had times before where they've waited, they've given us a little bit of a gap between things and then come back around to it. In this case, I feel it's like, well, you kind of just gave the very obvious kind of deal here. Kind of feel like we have to get back around to this, but it might be one of those things where they want to keep the cliffhanger going into the fight of, what did Momoshiki say? What is the deal, if there is one? And that might be something that they don't want to reveal right now, and want to reveal more in the middle of everything when it's going on. But I'm going to end the video there. Let me know what you think is going to happen in the upcoming chapter 26. What stuff from 25 are you most excited to see them expand upon? And what direction do you think they'll go in? How long do you think we'll spend in this sort of between arc before we get back around to the fights? And yeah, who are the big fights, do you think? Who are they going to pair off with the various Divine Tree characters? And then there's other things like, hey, let's not forget Code is still, like, out there theoretically, and like, he could come back into play if you need to, and all this sort of stuff. There's some really interesting other aspects as well that they could dive into. But for now, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.